Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay, shall we start? Julia.
Okay, so welcome everyone. We're very happy to have everyone here for this workshop. So I am Julia Sneher from Toulouse Business School from France. And I'm organizing this workshop with Maya, who is busy admitting everyone and dealing with all the logistical issues here. So we are, again, very, very happy to have you. Thank you for all the panelists that are joining and that have joined today, this morning, very early for some. Maybe we can go to the next slide, Maya. Great. So I will spend just a couple of minutes introducing some basic ideas for today and talking about the purpose of the workshop, and then Maya will introduce the panelists and the format, and we will continue with that. So first of all, this is a conference on new business models. And the business model research has been on the rise for many years, for 20 years now. In particular, in the last 10 years, we have seen a big rise of papers, of research. So I have a graph here from Masatucci and Afo, a review from 2017 showing this important interest in business models. And one of the results is the conference we have today. We go to the next slide, please. So business models, well, has been the first discussion in the business model world has been about definitions, and we have a variety of business models are. So we have business models that have been defined as a model, as a representation of business. For example, talk about it. Business models have been defined as a reflection of the firm's realized strategy. Now we have Jean-Enrique Ricard, who will also participate today. Business models that have been defined as an activity system. This is a definition coming from Zott and Amit. All of these definitions, what they have in common is to describe how the firm does business. So business models have been a topic of research, and today we have also research on business model innovation. Business model innovation that is describing new business models, companies that introduce new activities, introduce new partners, introduce new ways of doing business. Several examples, for instance, I have been doing research on Netflix, on Salesforce, companies often related to the digital world. And if we go to the next slide, please, Maya. So several classic examples, let's say, of new business models, such as Netflix, Spotify, Uber, Salesforce. These companies introduce new ways of doing business. So for example, Netflix introduces a new business model into the television world, into the cable networks world, first by allowing a subscription to DVDs, today allowing streaming services, becoming very successful with these new business models. And the next slide. So why do we care? Why do we care about particularly new business models? Well, we care from the strategy perspective. So many scholars today here in this workshop come from the strategy world. And it has been shown in research that business model innovation is related to positive firm performance. This is not the only reason. We care also because often new business models lead to new ecosystems that create new ways to create value and new ways to capture value. For example, Uber creates a new ecosystem for workers, new ways to connect to people. And these new business models often originate through cognition, through how founders, how managers think and develop and design these new business models. And again, this is a part where I do a lot of research, where I'm fascinated by understanding how these new business models come about. Through learning, through experimentation, through various processes that are interesting to study. Hence, we have this workshop to stimulate this research, and we'll talk a little bit more about the focus of the conference with the next slide. Great, so I will pass on to Maya now to focus on particularly on the purpose of the conference and the PhD workshop as well.
Yeah, this is the first PhD workshop that is organized within the frame of this conference, and we have been following the conference with Fauzi for a long time, and we also saw a need to have an extra arena where the young emerging scholars meet and discuss. And the overall focus of the conference, as you all know, is for us to understand together, can new business models be sustainable economically, environmentally, socially? What kind of models we can use, what kind of processes we can use, how we can explore different level of analysis that will inform us about that. And that's the new business model first PhD workshops, where we really, as Julia mentioned, and I also stressed, we want to basically nurture, provide an arena for the next generation of new business model scholars. On the picture, you see a tradition that comes from Catalonia, building the human tower, and that is called Castel. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. But the idea, the metaphor that we want to express here is that we stand on shoulders of giants, and the base, our senior scholars are providing the base that will help us to learn together and to evolve the new business model community, where more experienced scholars are supporting the young generation, and we all learn together. And the idea here is in an informal setting to provide as much interaction, exchange of ideas, dialogue, and getting feedback in more relaxed, intimate setting, as well as practical advice. And this is how we have been thinking. We wanted with Julia to be able to attract a really experienced and experienced faculty. So we have Charles Baden-Fuller from Cass Business School. We have Jon Enric Ricard from ESS Spain. We have Minna Halme from Aalto, Finland. Nancy Bocken from Maastricht University. Jonathan Pinske from Manchester University. Stefan Schaltegger from Ljubljana University in Germany. Jan Jonker from Radboud Midlands. These are our panelists that will share their experience with you, and you will have the opportunity to ask questions. And then all of them, plus Thomas Ritter from CBS Denmark, Peter Wells from Cardiff, and Jonathan Gabrielsson and Svante Andersson from Halmstad, will have a smaller group discussion where you would be able to present your research and get some feedback interactively. The format that we have for today, you all have the program. We have first a panel where which senior scholar will present their insights for 10 minutes, and then we will have a 20 minutes question and answer there. This will be followed by a short break, and then we will provide smaller breakout rooms where you can shortly present, pitch your research, and get interaction and feedback, both from the fellow PhD students that are in a group, but also from the senior faculty. And we will end up the workshop with a second panel that is more practical oriented, like sharing personal experience. And it follows the same format, 10 minutes like presentation, and then 20 minutes interactive part where you would be able to ask questions. You know that this is a pre-conference activity, and we have half day. Maybe next year there will be a longer time because it's a tight time frame, and therefore we would like you to be mindful of the time. We will keep the time, as Julia said, like keep your 10 minutes, and then we will be quite strict with the discussion as well. And this is also valid for the breakout rooms. Okay, so with no further ado, I will stop sharing my my slides, and I will give the floor to Charles to tell us a little bit about the historical roots of business model research and how it's all started. The floor is yours, Charles. I'm sure there is a lot of questions, but let's save those for the panel discussion after all presentations. I would like to give the floor to Jon. Jon.
Okay, I hope everybody can see the slides, listen well. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Maya and Yuliva, for the invitation to share some thoughts. It was difficult after Charles' introduction, which covers so many things, that I'm just going to focus essentially in the last point that he was taking, presenting this idea that is given this title of what business model impacts the smart cities and communities. And I like to talk about relational business model. No? Now, the interest for this research came from work that we are doing on the governance of cities. You know, the world is urbanizing. Cities are growing in size. You know, even with the pandemic, it's still we had a big movement into this thing, and of course they have to evolve into more sustainable models, and technology helps here and provides the opportunity just to create new business models that some way can help cities to transform and get prosperity, but at the same time, social cohesion and more equality and more environmentally sustainability, which is necessary if we want to advance in this Agenda 2030 or the Sustainable Development Goal, and in general, if we want to provide the opportunities that cities can provide to all the world, not only a few privileged ones. No? Now, of course, as part of this solution, digital platforms are emerging. This sharing economy has a rhetoric that brings a lot of solutions. No? It is more sustainable, more equitable. It creates value for the communities. But we saw at the same time as they were developing with this rhetoric, that they were getting some resistance in some cities. No? In particular, we I'm living in Barcelona, and Airbnb in Barcelona, was growing a lot. I mean, again, under this rhetoric. And if we move back into 2016, I mean, the conflict between Airbnb and the city of Barcelona was really at a very top highs. No, they were kind of fighting each other, and we try to see a little bit, get some data, and I'll show something about if Airbnb were really providing these promises to the city of Barcelona, and the first work that we did got very, even politically involved. No? So the city wanted to use us as arguments against the company. The company that was locally run by our alumni of IESE even moved into IESE top, saying that we should not be writing depending on which things that were not good for the company. So we got really interested about this transformational value of this business model, but at the same time, why we have this strong reaction. Now, while this started kind of empirical, we end up working in a theoretical model with Juliva, that joined forces when we were looking at this thing a lot from the point of view of the city, especially the interaction between business model and the city. And we developed this paper together, and also with a couple of colleagues more, that was published in this strategy science journal. I'm making a story short because I don't have much time, but what we saw here is located in this small graph, was that there was different types of digital platforms, and the ones that really create some conflict, they have some characteristics. If they were digital platforms, asset-based, like Airbnb with physical asset. Now the question, the key characteristics was if the assets were localized or not, and if they were scarce into the city. When we were talking about labor related, like Uber, to say something, the idea was, again, if the labor involved was localized or globalized, was very important. When it was localized, and especially in a precarious, low skill, less protected kind of labor, these things make it that whatever by local outsiders or by local insider, that there was highly likelihood an intensity of resistance collective action, that were kind of helped by the facility of formalization of this interaction. So the elements that kind of organized voice or not, of course, was an important determinant into this thing. And when this collective action generated this resistance, I mean, how can we alleviate? How can we deal with this thing? And then it's when it comes to these relational business models that we have here, and I highlighted these important elements that are characterized by moving from being, most of these platforms are kind of two-sided, but really they are multi-sided because they are affecting many stakeholders. One has to incorporate them into the business model, and as a consequence of these multiple sides, they have to use this inclusive, as we call them, stakeholders value proposition, that I'll develop a little bit more. The value that they are providing to these stakeholders, and a governance that is more ecosystem centered. So it's not market driven, but is more relational. And this we've been going back into the empirics, especially to try to understand a little bit more this role of this social stakeholders value proposition. At some point we call it social value proposition, but I think it's stakeholders value proposition. And we went back into the work in Barcelona with the data of Airbnb, and in the slides that you will have copies, you will have more elaboration on the particular empirics that I don't have time to cover here, but we did kind of a quantitative analysis to see how Airbnb is fulfilling their promises to host, to guests, and especially to the city, to integrating these elements of stakeholders. And we did it in Barcelona and in another city, which is Igualada, where we also move into this qualitative data that I think enriches a lot in trying to understand this relational business model creation, no? This element which essentially is joint value creation. Is not market driven. It requires a different kind of the relationship, the dynamics that try to find jointly solutions that are good for the cities at the same time that can be, profitable for the platform, and therefore creating value for the host and for the guests that are being involved. No, as I say, I don't have time to cover about the empirics, but I still like to show these densities. These density maps are very powerful. That show how Airbnb, by promising democratizing rents, distributing tourists around the city, they really have a concentration. When you look at the densities that look essentially like hotels, so creating an increasing problem of reaction against the excess tourists. No? Now, we develop in a qualitative analysis all the dynamics, no, between these companies, that the company and the city. As I mentioned before, we kind of started this thing in 2016, which will be some way kind of the top at the moment where the conflict was more intense, and with the time this has been evolving in a smooth way in trying to get solutions that are more adequate to the cities. No? Now, going back to the conclusions, because I'm running out of time, let me just move here. I think this analysis helps to complement our theoretical thought about providing a more nuanced view of this stakeholders' value proposition that needs to be dynamic. It's a learning process. We have to jointly find a solution, and that's something that the city, the regulator, the region, that may change a little bit from one place to another, but some way that part, the public part, if you want, has to understand this dynamic process. And of course also the platform architect or the platform owner need to understand this thing, that the social value proposition, the stakeholder value proposition is not just cheap talk, it really substantive, and it is not enough just to say, we do create this value in an abstract way. This value has to be pretty specific, and therefore it has to be localized. So the context here is very important, and many times it's even micro localized. No? Even the city can be a too large of an agglomeration for the particular solution that has to be created. So that provides implications. Yeah, I'll finish in a minute.
Yeah.
With city authorities that has to enable this value creation, flexible governance, and of course this dynamic into the regulation, and of course similar thing: open relationships, effective governance, and proactive stance on the side of the platform. So I conclude that the cities face critical challenges. Digital platform can be part of the solution, but can be also a problem, or can exaggerate the problem. One needs to get this balance, and that requires productive interaction in a process that is co-designing the delivery, the design and delivery, the creation and delivery of this social value proposition. And that's what we call relational business models. Okay, sorry for taking a little bit longer, and I hope we can discuss it further in the questions and answers.
Thank you very much. And as you mentioned, you have provided a bigger slide deck that will be sent out after the event. And you can also listen a little bit a longer, more detailed version during your keynote speech now in the afternoon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Again, I'm sure there is a lot of questions. Save them for our panel discussion afterwards. I would like to invite Mina to talk about impact a little bit and sustainable business models.
Mina, we don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Great. And are my slides also visible? Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here, and very delighted to continue after the two previous speakers, because my main interest on business models are how they can potentially change consumption and business and production for sustainability. And I have been interested in the impact of various types of sustainability activities of companies for ages, basically. And here, my particular take on this morning's panel are the business models for sustainability and how we could actually assess better than at present their impacts on environmental and social situations. And the starting point for me is that business models for sustainability are increasing in popularity in both in practice as well as in research. And they are considered one of the strands for renewing business towards more sustainable strategies and practices. However, if you read works on business models for sustainability, what you find is that often the discussion from the sustainability perspective is quite descriptive and tends to focus on the main positive aspects. So for instance, the Airbnb, which was just previously discussed, in the beginning when the business model came out, there was actually a lot of let's say positive promise over there, and primarily the discussion was about how it would be sustainable instead of, for instance, reducing the need of building new hotels or maintaining the money circulating within the local economy rather than flying out to the shareholders of big hotel chains, for instance. However, why it is difficult to evaluate the sustainable business models is because often as academics, and righteously so, we have the idea that if you assess the sustainability impact of something, it should be very thorough. It should be life cycle analysis type or social life cycle analysis type of evaluation. And of course, this becomes very laborious, this becomes very expensive. But basically, we still should be able to have an idea of whether the business models for sustainability are able in some ways to contribute to solving major sustainability problems like those relating to the planetary boundaries issues, and whether they are able to move us toward the sustainable development goals. So what I'm going to suggest to you is that we need to accept some sort of and develop mid-range assessments for the sustainability of business models, which are in between the LCA type of thorough analysis and descriptions of the positive impacts, what we see today. So here is one example from previous work of myself and colleagues, where we were evaluating business models on environmental, social, and economic aspects, and we broke down. We took the main sustainability impacts from these business models, basing these impacts on previous academic work, and did rough assessments with a Likert scale type of from -2 to +2, whether the contribution of the business model is positive or negative or none. And instead of only evaluating this ourselves, we wanted that specialists of the fields of the business models, we had energy, mobility, and food business models here, we had experts evaluating the sustainability impacts of the business models. I'll give another example from research that we were doing in the context of poverty alleviating innovations, where we were looking at water and energy business models for low-income emerging markets. And the slide that you see here is from a simple instrument that we developed later on for the use of our students in our Creative Sustainability Master Program, some of who do this type of co-creative business model development with local students and stakeholders in some African countries and in India. So we started from asking questions around ecological issues like, is the innovation more energy efficient? Is it more material efficient? So on and so forth. On social sustainability questions like, does the innovation help to fulfill basic necessities? Does it bring better health or better access to education, and so on and so forth? Again, looking at what previous research says about the low income markets business models and their expected sustainability impacts. And we came up with an assessment framework which again follows the same logic as I explained previously. And my point with suggesting these types of mid-range frameworks is that they could be used for pre-screening in practice when business models are being designed. We have also tested these with some of Aalto University's startup incubators for them to test the business models that they are intending to set up. They can also reveal unintended negative impacts and show blind spot, and in that way assist in refining business models for better sustainability outcomes. And also what we think is that they can be useful for researchers who study different configurations under which business models achieve higher versus lower sustainability impacts. And finally, I'll finish with a word of caution that when suggesting this type of rough instrument, of course, the results that we get out should be considered indicative rather than definitive. But the main point here would be that it's better to get approximate answers than have almost no answers at all to the question of sustainability impacts of business models. And I'll finish here so that we can have time for discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Minna. Just on time a little bit ahead, so thank you for that. Again, save your questions, and we have one more presentation from the panel by Nancy. So the floor is yours, Nancy.
Great. Sorry, I need to go into presentation mode, so give me 1 second. Do you see the right screen now, or?
Yes.
Great. Well, nice to see you all, or at least I see at least 5 of you at the same time this morning. So today is a bit of a different presentation. I think we had great presentations also on theoretical backgrounds, also on frameworks and assessment. And I really liked the presentation by Minna. I was actually tweeting about it now because I think it's very relevant to know how we can actually assess the impact of business models. And this is sort of also weaved into my presentation today, which is more about impact. I just wanted to start a little bit with my personal background. So we have a little bit of an idea where I'm coming from. So basically in my work, I didn't really follow the mainstream academic that remains academic sort of pathway. So I did a bit of a mix. And also already during my master's studies, I basically worked with companies already. So I thought, why, for instance, do people volunteer? So I worked with a volunteering organization to help them find more motivated volunteers. And one of the exciting things there is that I found that people are also very extrinsically motivated in different ways to learn skills to do volunteering. So every time, I guess, in the work that I do, I try to think like, how can it be relevant for a certain type of stakeholder? And what problem am I trying to solve? And that maybe comes a little bit also because, maybe unlike some others, I'm not coming from a business school, but I also did my PhD at an engineering school, and engineering is very much problem focused. I see a problem, I need to solve it. So I think that also probably formed the work that I do. So I think it's fair to say that I try to mix the academic and the business world. So you can see that a little bit from the background. So maybe I'm a little bit atypical here. So goal, so I think also Minna discussed it, that you also had like a clear goal in our research and our work. And for me, it has almost been roughly the same goal for almost a decade. And that's trying to bridge this idea action gap for sustainability. Like in my work, also when I worked for a big consultancy, I basically found out that sustainability was already very important. Climate change was a huge problem already. But a lot of businesses didn't do anything with that. So I was really shocked by that. So maybe also naive and shocked at the same time. So I think this became my goal, like trying to see what all these ideas already were. Like we already have the ideas to solve some of the problems, but how to put those into action. So that became one of the themes that goes through my research. So what I want to do now is give you some tips. So these are not the tips to write a paper in a high impact business journal, but these are basically the tips that I see to write something and do research that also has an impact potentially on society, taking that as a starting point. So basically the most easy thing is starting with this business or societal goal. Like what is the problem that bugs you the most? So for me, it was climate change, and why are we not doing anything about it? So that was my main frustration, becoming aware of that through my first research project as a research assistant. Then who are your stakeholders? Like in my research, it often got funded actually by businesses, or at least part funded by businesses. So next to the academic audience, who are the stakeholders you have to satisfy? Then formulating your research problem, like what is my research problem then, if this is my societal problem? So of course you have to bridge them because you're not just a consultant, but you have to do both. Then evaluate the literature and theories. I think the overview that Charles gave was already brilliant, because he discussed the different contexts that business models have been discussed in already in literature. So I think this is a brilliant starting point to see where we could be going, also as a cohort of researchers. Then I would advise you, if you can, to find a research team that matches your own views and goals on how to do research. I think I felt that quite strongly in Cambridge in the 2 different groups that I joined. People were very passionate about doing research, but also passionate about solving real world problems. So for me, that was very important. And when you get a chance, and also develop your own network a little bit with like-minded people. Then establish this connection with a relevant organization. So what I find is that if I find a problem, more people share that problem. So same already with the volunteering organization during my master's studies. With my PhD, was funded by Unilever, so they already had like a real problem to be solved. But also if you are not funded by a company, there are many companies or other organizations that might want to work with you, because you're going to help them potentially through your research. And I don't think that we should all become action researchers. I think some companies also don't understand what an action researcher is, from my experience, because then they're like, oh, are you one of a cheap or a free consultant? No, I'm not. So it's different. So sometimes you can also do more conventional things, and companies feel quite comfortable if you say, I want to do a case study, I want to interview you, I want to do a survey, as long as then you basically try and wrap it and package it in a way so it's also relevant for them. So that comes to my second last point, and that's turning research into a tool. When I was preparing this presentation, I actually remembered that I wrote a book chapter on that once, like, I don't know, 8-9 years ago. It's also in the link later on. It's very short, it's just 1 page literally. But it's the idea that you can basically turn your research potentially into a tool. And that tool might take different forms, from just a checklist. So some of the early sustainability studies, for instance, made checklists for Volvo or other companies. They were quite practical, but also building on previous knowledge, basically. And then creative outlets, I don't think that Twitter and LinkedIn are necessarily creative, but other things like interviews, podcasts, and blogs are quite helpful ways to basically put your research out there in different types of ways, besides the academic papers. Although from my experience, I have found out that companies do read academic papers sometimes. So some final thoughts. Practice might take different forms. So it's not only like a business, it can also be a group of consumers, volunteering organization, NGOs. Also work, for instance, with WWF. They also work a lot with businesses and are interested in transforming business models, for instance. So it involves different types of actors, but also the form depends on what you want to achieve, right? Do you want to change a big group of customers, or make a change within one business, or transform a whole sector? So you really have to take that into mind, what your idea of practice is. Then don't worry if you haven't interacted with organizations yet, because I think even if you do a very good theoretical piece, it should also be, it could also be highly relevant to a business. So I also find if you make that translation either through a blog or something else, companies do find it really exciting to think about problems in different types of ways. So don't feel like you don't have to write pure theoretical pieces. If you have a great idea, by all means, but try to make it either visual, write it in a blog in a shorter way, and try to distinct the message that you want to want people to learn basically about. And I think mainly my final tip, and that's maybe what I sometimes see in researchers, is that they do loads of different things, like a bit of this, a bit of that, but I think it's helpful to have something that motivates your research throughout. Like, just don't change only trends, like, oh, today it's sharing economy, then let's do sharing economy, and yesterday it was circular, let's do circular, but also have something motivating your research behind it. Like, what is it you want to achieve? If you want to be in it, maybe post your PhD and also remain an academic. Afterwards, it's important to see like what motivates me in my research in the long term. So this was a relatively short presentation. I have the slides here on the contact details and also some little bits on tools, and the second source contains a checklist as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nancy.
Right, so we will open this up to discussion. So if we have questions from PhD students, from faculty, from other panelists, so feel free to just jump in, or you can post them on the chat if you prefer that. We will monitor that. So thank you, everyone. I hope this was a useful 1 hour session for all of you. We try to keep up the breakout rooms. Back to our second part, where we have a second panel with three very experienced scholars that we wanted to give you some more personal feedback and advice. So we start with the publication process with Jonathan Pinkse, who is an associate editor at Organization and Environment, who has been the chair of the one division at Academy of Management. And we will continue with Stefan Schaltiger and Jan Jonker, who are another two giants, we will say, on whose shoulders we want to stand and whose advice we want to hear. And we'll have a Q&A in the end again for any questions you might know. So again, the point is here to have informal advice to give you guys as much feedback, tacit knowledge as you might need for continuing in this academic world. So without further ado, I'll stop here and let Jonathan take over.
Yes, thank you very much, Julia. So I do not have a formal presentation because it needed to be informal, and at the moment you have a presentation, it's no longer informal. So I'll just run you through some of the experience I have had on both sides of the equation, I would say, as someone who publishes in different types of journals, but also as someone who is judging many papers on their merits in different roles. I'm an associate editor indeed at Business and Society and Organization and Environment, and I do several special issues. So I had to make many decisions, partly with Julia because we work on the same special issue. So I think one of the main questions for this audience is a little bit, okay, what is your ambition? Where do you want to publish? Because with business model papers, and especially also business models for sustainability paper or sustainable business models paper, you see that there are different outlets. So many papers on sustainable business models have been published in Journal of Cleaner Production. And for many, that is actually a very good outlet because it has a broad readership. It can be more practical, more technical, and it works really well. But the moment you would want to publish in more mainstream management journals, then the question becomes a little bit different because then you get the holy grail of the theoretical contribution. I call it the Holy Grail because no one really knows what it is. But it needs to be more, a bigger thing, more abstract. You need to not just apply a theoretical lens, but you also need to make a contribution to that theoretical lens. So you will be rejected many times by claims that you did not make a sufficient theoretical contribution. I've had that many times. I even did publish papers in top journals where one of the reviewers would claim that we didn't have a contribution until the end of the process. Thankfully, editors sometimes overrule that, but realize that it can be quite different. So the first piece of advice is really to think about, where do I want to publish and what is it that I want to achieve? Who do I want to have as my audience? Because sometimes when people work, especially in business schools, where everything needs to be top nowadays, it doesn't always fit. I see people sending papers to journals where there's just a complete misfit. And the good thing is nowadays that you'll get desk rejected then. So you'll get it back within a few weeks. Back in the day, you could have to wait for 6 months until you then get it back and saying it doesn't fit. At least processes have sped up a little bit because most journals have broader editorial boards. But still, really think about, okay, what is it that I want to achieve? What is the situation where you work? What does your current employer want? Where do you do your PhD? Where do you want to work? So if you, for example, want to work in the UK or the US in a business school, then you will have to look at journal rankings, whether you like it or not, because that is the reality of many of these schools. If that's not necessarily what you're looking at, then don't worry so much about the journal rankings and really try to find more your audience. I've been trying to do both, to really try to say, okay, sometimes I have papers that I think, these can really go to top journals. they most often don't end up there, but at least you try. And sometimes I say, yeah, I like the story. I think it has a nice little message, but hey, it was just one little project. So I've sent papers then to journals like Business Strategy Environment. Interestingly, some of those papers have been cited way more times than some of the so-called top journal articles. So just try to be realistic instead of only thinking that everything needs to be top, otherwise it doesn't exist. Unless you want to go to the US to one of the top business schools, then don't do that. Then you say, okay, no, I really need to go to the elite journals. That's what I want to achieve. And you probably have to start networking with others that know how to do that and so forth. So keep that in mind. Then the second thing is what to publish. We used to have conceptual versus empirical papers. I would now say there is a new kid on the block, and that is the literature review. When I did my PhD, there was no way you could publish a literature review because there was no contribution. It just didn't really exist. Now there are many options to do that. Sometimes they can be a bit boring, but that's my personal view. Also with a literature review, I would say try to have a thought, have a message, and so forth. One of the main issues I would say is at the level of a PhD, be very careful with conceptual papers because they're actually really difficult. It's very often easier to publish an empirical paper because if you've collected good data, people at least see the proof and say, okay, I can see it in your data and I trust you, and you're more likely to get published. With a conceptual paper, I've published quite a few, but many I can also show you. The message I got back, yeah, I find it unconvincing without proper evidence. So they basically push you into making it empirical. So really having something there. So what is it that you actually bring in a conceptual paper? Is it a framework? Management scholars very often do 2x2s. The number of business model frameworks we now have, is that then going to be the new contribution? Can you actually make a claim that I have a new business model framework, because we already have many. So you have to be very careful that you're not just trying to come up with something where we feel there is a bit of saturation in the field. So my advice would actually be focus on your data, focus on the empirical part at first, and you'll get better and better in formulating the front end of empirical papers, which can then become maybe more theoretical papers. But otherwise, it can be really difficult. Not impossible. Some PhD students publish theoretical papers. I recently saw someone who published an Academy of Management review based on a PhD paper. It is not impossible, but it is rare. Then really realize, okay, if I send it, what are the standards in that journal? So no matter what it is, what do they expect? So actually read what they say on their website, because they very often now update that and say, this is what we're actually looking for. In the sustainability field, I recently tried to publish in global environmental change. And there they, for example, really say, we want to have empirical papers. We don't really do conceptual papers. So don't send a conceptual paper there then. And really try to understand a little bit what they're doing, but also by just looking at some recent papers in the journal. Look at the last few issues. Look at editorials, so where the editors actually explain what they're doing. Many journals have that now. And then you get a better understanding of, okay, this is what it needs to look like. So my second paper in my career was in California Management Review, which is more applied. And I really just read, 15 papers in that journal related to my topic and analyzed it. How do they do it? How do they actually, what is just the structure of such a paper? And I tried to mimic that with my own story. So I copied style, not content, because that's plagiarism. Be very careful with that. But do that. Try to figure out. It's not literature. It is academic writing. So there are many norms, and the norms are changing. So you need to figure that out. With empirical papers, and especially when you do qualitative, which many people in this field do, make sure that you realize what the expectations are for methodology sections, because that is improving tremendously, or at least becoming more extensive. It used to be just a one-pager. Now you can have 10 pages of a methodology section. What do they do? What do they explain? Really go into detail there. Then the thing is, what is the aim? It is to get a revise and resubmit. I've had many younger colleagues telling me, oh, I got this email back from the journal, but they say it's highly risky, revise and resubmit. I'm not going to do it. It's like, oh, you're missing your opportunity. I've not seen a journal the last 10 years that is not giving a high risk. Don't go there. Are you sure? They all say that. It's standardized. It is just from the system. They don't even write this. We just click on a button and then this is what pops up. They never say, oh, you're nearly there. We love it. It doesn't happen really. So you go for your R&R and try to do it. Sometimes you might say it's not possible when your data is not good enough or the deadline is too strict, but you can always reach out to an editor. Ask for an extension, but don't do that 5 days before the deadline. Do it a few weeks before the deadline. I have never refused an extension as an editor. I don't really mind if you need to take a little bit more, not 6 months probably, but be realistic, plan well, and then just ask that. Then how to do a revision. What I've learned and where I had an edge over some of my colleagues doing a PhD is I had a PhD supervisor who really took me on the job and said, okay, this is how you actually write a letter, the response to the reviewers and so forth. And these are kind of skills that are not part of PhD programs often, but are very important. So my rule is always have very detailed responses to all reviewers. Always stay polite, even if they're stupid. Don't say they're stupid because you don't want to offend them. And they're over the top polite. Just go for it. It's just the way we do things. And I once had a reviewer, we talked about coping strategies. How can you deal with something? And the reviewer read copying strategies and said, oh, this is isomorphism. This is institutional theory and so forth. It's like, okay, we take the blame. And I just wrote something like, oh, apologies for the lack of clarity, blah, blah, blah. We actually mean this and this and this. That reviewer ate out of my hand in the next round because realized, oh, crap, I was stupid and was not a problem anymore. So always kind of take the blame, even if they're making the mistake. But also sometimes say, if they claim that it is this and you think it's like that, rebuttal is also an option. You don't go along with what everyone is saying. Sometimes they misinterpret it. So also stick to your own guns. What is it? No, you misunderstand it. I believe it's like this. It can lead to a trench war. So that can be the tricky thing. But yeah, if you know really well what you're talking about, do it and just explain that you clarify it. Some things, when they ask for things that you can't really do, you can move it to the discussion, future research, and so forth. But don't do that with every point, because I've seen people responding to it, and every time it's like, yeah, I agree, but I say it's for future research. And then they didn't make any changes to the paper. And it's like, yeah, now you're cheating your way out of this process. So take it seriously. Really work on the letter. That is my main message there, and really try to address everything. You can start with the letter. Sometimes I now do that. I just look at all the comments and I write down how I actually want to address this. Final thing, because I have to wrap it up. You don't see that, but I see that. If you get accepted, you get your paper published, that's not the end of the journey. Think about what Nancy already said. Write a blog, write a LinkedIn post, do a tweet, do something, because you want people then to start reading your paper. Send it out to some people you've used, whose work you used. Most people really appreciate that because they are flattered. So start the academic conversation. It doesn't end, it actually starts when you publish. This is how you develop a career. And that's it. Super, Jonathan. So thanks a lot for all these pointers. So for people that have questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and maybe Jonathan can start answering some of them there. In the meantime, we'll do one more talk by Stefan on advice on early career. Again, informal, tacit knowledge. We're all happy to hear all that. So Stefan, I let you take over here.
Thank you very much. So I'm trying to share my slide. I wonder whether this is now already working.
Yeah, we see it.
You see it, but probably looks a little bit funny for me. But however, first of all, hello everybody. I have a lot of points which are similar to what Jonathan has said, and that probably confirms that there are some issues which have a certain relevance. First of all, I think there is no cook recipe or any kind of recipe for an academic career. These are always personal paths. And what I can tell you is just something out of my experience and observations of careers of former PhD students of mine, etc. But what I think is most important is stay yourself. Don't try to copy somebody, to be somebody else. Try to be yourself and to not be too much fixed on the career, because then it gets somehow stiff and artificial. And most careers somehow have unexpected developments. There are opportunities that pop up, and you can only see them and be open enough for these opportunities if you're not too much focused and too narrow, fixed to one specific view of what an academic career would be. By the way, my impression is that a lot of people who have made an academic career never had the intention at the beginning to go this way. At least this was true for me. I never had the idea to write a PhD, but then opportunities popped up, then I did it, etc. So these were just opportunities that emerged, and then I assessed them, and then I thought, well, okay, in that case, why not? Do not collect too much advice, which sounds a little bit contradictory to that I have a huge list of advices here, but everybody has an own story, and maybe the advice of somebody which is based on her or his own life and career, it doesn't match with your approach, environment, area, etc. And don't try to mimic. I do not think that this is really a good approach. You can also learn a lot from experimenting and from failing. Of course, that means that you have to develop a certain tolerance, you have to develop an exercise stamina, but very often you can learn more by writing a paper, presenting it somewhere, and everybody thinks it's absolutely awful because of these and these reasons, and then you learn from it directly with your paper, which you have written, where you get your personal feedback from it. Then when you learn this a little bit more, let's say, in abstract form, I suggest to stay pragmatic, which means you focus on one core idea per paper and do one step after the other. Don't do too many papers in parallel, projects in parallel. I observe very often with PhD students that they want to cover all the problems of the world with engaging in lots of projects, in lots of papers, and in one paper they want to cover all the problems. And that overtaxes and makes things complicated, and then nobody understands the story. And there's the danger that you get distracted too much. One thing which is in contrast to what a lot of people say, but would be one advice for me, is think before you read. A lot of people say, well, first read what's here and find the research and literature gap. And I would suggest to do the opposite. Think about, well, what fascinates you? And think about what you think would be a solution there or an analysis there. And write that down on one page by hand. Just sketch it. And then read what others have said about it. And then refine your thinking. Like that, there is a higher likelihood that you are going to develop original ideas, new ideas, and that always gives you a benchmark. Otherwise, if you just start reading an area, first of all, there's so much being published, you're never finished with reading, and you continue to read, and the more you read, the more you find other interesting areas, and you're not going to start writing or developing a concept. So start thinking very early and also start writing very early. Write something down and then go back into the literature and check your thoughts with what has already been done. I suggest to focus on relevance, which is also something a lot would not underline. They would say rigor is the most important thing, particularly if you want to publish in top journals. But I think rigor is something, well, yes, you have to ensure rigor. Of course, this has to be methodologically rigorous. But if you want to develop a real career and if you want to make a difference, then you have to develop something that's relevant. And therefore, what is interesting, what makes a difference, and how can you make a difference? Start with that, and then think about the method, how you could develop this knowledge that makes a difference. I think there's too much research and academic talk about things which are not relevant, which are rigorously developed, but not relevant. And these are kind of boring careers then. Team up and change your perspectives. Talk with researchers whose work you find interesting, involve in exchange programs, visit different institutions, and also become a reviewer to change the site to see how is it as a reviewer, and then you can understand why reviewers react on what. So I think that helps a lot in understanding also the academic game. Develop a portfolio of themes, not just one topic, but one topic at a time, but not too many themes. Choose 2-3 topics and then write papers in these different topical areas, a small selection of different topics which you find fascinating, and publish in different journals. One thing which I think is important, I see that sometimes very ambitious academics, young academics, think, well, you know, it has to be the best journal, and right away, that's where I want to publish. And I think Jonathan said that before, it's very unlikely that you're gonna, in the first go, publish in the best journals. Like with lots of other things, you have to exercise that first. And it's absolutely no problem to publish in a C or B level ranked journal first, and to be the last author of a team and to work together with others. There you learn something, and then you can take the next step. Of course, you can also directly try to make the big jump to the highest level journal, but the likelihood that you'll have a lot of disappointment is, of course, much higher unless you really have good co-authors and you're embedded in an extremely experienced team, etc. The likelihood is small, and therefore I would say to try to publish in different journals. Some of the C and B level journals have higher impact than the top journals. And of course, if you can create impact with your publications, then this can be a very important part and foundation for your career. So these are just some personal thoughts, and it is very personal. I think everybody has different experiences and will probably tell you a different story and make different advices. So don't take my advices too serious. Just see them as one input. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Stefan, for this useful, thoughtful perspective on early career advice. Think first. That's probably my takeaway from this talk. So again, if you have questions, feel free to post them in chat or keep them for our panel. And we have one last talk first from Jan. So for